The dress was blue. Not the faded blue of the clothes Mabel wore every day, dyed with whatever was left at the bottom of the pots in the laundry house where she worked. This was a deep blue, almost the color of night, with embroidery along the hem that Senna had sewn by hand over the past 3 weeks, pricking her fingers without complaining once. "You look like a court wolf," Senna said, adjusting the lace at Mabel's back with her teeth pressed together and her eyes glistening. "I swear by every ancestor, Mabel. You really do." Mabel looked at the polished metal mirror leaning against the bedroom wall, the one she and Senna shared. The reflection was blurred, as always, but enough to see what the dress did to her. It pulled in at the waist, opened the shoulders, made her neck look long. She was not noble. She had no Pack surname, no father with rank, no mother with title. She was the daughter of a guard killed in a border dispute, and a woman who washed other people's clothes until she was 40, when her heart gave out. But that night, looking at the warped reflection in the metal, she almost believed she could be something else. "He will keep his word," Mabel murmured, more to herself than to Senna. Senna did not answer right away. The silence lasted too long. "Senna, he said he would." Her friend finally spoke, with the careful tone of someone who does not want to hurt, but also refuses to lie. "He said he would present you to the Pack tonight, that he would make the bond official before the elders." "Then I believe him." Senna finished the lace, stepped aside, and looked at Mabel with that expression she had worn since they were children, the expression of someone who knows more than she says and stays quiet out of love. "It's just that Dorian has a mother," she said softly. "I know. And his mother has plans." "I know, Senna." Her friend closed her mouth. Mabel picked up the small silver brooch that had belonged to her mother, a stylized wolf with pale blue stone eyes, and pinned it at her chest. It was the only piece of jewelry she owned. It was also the only thing that made her feel like she carried someone with her. They left together for the Great Hall of Vithara. The gathering of packs happened once a year, when representatives from every clan across the territory met in the castle's central hall to renew alliances, present new bonds, and reaffirm hierarchies. It was a night of feasting, wine, and quiet judgment. Everyone watched, everyone measured. The status of every she-wolf present was read in the smallest details: the cut of the dress, the quality of the fabric, the man standing beside her. Mabel had no man beside her. She had the promise of one. Dorian Vielle was the son of the beta chief of the Crestfall Pack, a young man with brown hair and broad shoulders who knew exactly how to smile in a way that looked honest. For 3 months he had courted Mabel with enough attention to be taken seriously. Dried flowers left on the laundry window ledge. Words spoken low during public training sessions where he sparred and she watched. A promise made on a rainy afternoon, when he held both her hands and said, "At the gathering, I will present you as my chosen," in front of everyone. She had believed him because he had seemed to believe it himself. The hall was full when Mabel and Senna arrived. Torches lined the stone walls in long rows, pack banners hung from the ceiling almost to the floor, long tables covered with roasted meat, dark bread, and pitchers of red wine. The smell was overwhelming: resin burning in the braziers, leather from the guard's armor, the layered scent of dozens of wolves from different clans, wet earth on the boots of those who had traveled far. Mabel found Dorian near the central table. He saw her. She saw that he saw her, and she also saw, immediately after, that he looked away. There was a woman beside him, tall, with black hair pinned in braids threaded with gold, dressed in a deep burgundy that would have cost more than Mabel earned in 2 years. Dorian's mother stood 3 steps behind, arms crossed, expression satisfied. Mabel went still. Senna touched her arm. "Mabel, leave it." She breathed in. The hall continued loud around her, voices and laughter and the sound of pitchers hitting stone tables. No one was looking at her. No one was paying attention to the woman in the blue dress standing near the entrance with her dead mother's brooch pinned to her chest. Dorian approached. He came alone, which she read for 1 second as a good sign, and then she saw the look on his face and understood that it was not. "Mabel," he said, with the low voice and the tone of someone who rehearsed. "I need to speak with you." "Go ahead." "My mother. The negotiations with the Sereth Pack depend on a union with the Calder family. The woman there is Isolde Calder. It was settled last week." The hall stayed loud. Mabel heard everything as though there were a veil between herself and the world. "You made a promise," she said. "Not as an accusation. As a fact. I know what I said." He did not look away, which she almost wished he had. "But the clan comes first. You know how it works." "I know how it works." "Mabel." "Go," she said. "Go to your table, Dorian." He stayed 2 seconds longer, perhaps waiting for her to say something that would make it easier for him. She said nothing, and then he left. Senna was at her side in less than a breath, her warm hand on Mabel's arm, her eyes holding a restrained fury that Mabel did not yet have the strength to feel. "Let's go," Senna whispered. "No," Mabel answered, with a calm that surprised even herself. "I'm not leaving here running. I'm leaving with my head up." She turned toward the exit. The hall was long. She would have to cross half of it to reach the main door, and the alternative was the back corridor, which everyone knew was the servants' passage. She chose the main door. She walked. Her mother's brooch felt heavier than it should against the blue fabric. She was perhaps 12 steps from the exit when she felt them. Not through sound. Through the silence that sound made around them. The kind of silence that opens when people of weight enter a space, when the air recognizes a hierarchy before the eyes do. The conversations did not stop entirely, but they shifted in pitch, dropped lower, grew more careful. Mabel raised her eyes. 3 men had entered through the main door directly ahead of her. The first was as broad as a wall, with short red hair and an amused expression, as if the entire world were a joke only he understood. The second was taller, dark-haired, with a half-smile at the corner of his mouth that suggested he knew exactly the effect he produced and enjoyed every detail of it. The third was not smiling. The third had dark hair, nearly black, and eyes she could not read at that distance but that had fixed on her before fixing on anything else in the hall. He was taller than the other 2. He wore a dark cloak with no visible ornaments, but there was something in the way the space around him seemed to reorganize itself, as though the entire hall knew where he was and instinctively moved back an inch. She heard someone nearby murmur a title. "King." Mabel stopped, not because she chose to, because her legs decided before her mind did. The dark-eyed man had not looked away since he entered, and it was not the kind of look that measured a dress or assessed a posture. It was the kind of look that searched for something specific, and that appeared, in that moment, to have found it. The red-haired man said something to him in a low voice. The Alpha King did not answer. He kept looking at Mabel, as though the entire hall did not exist, and she, who had spent the last hour trying to leave that place with whatever dignity she had left, realized that her legs simply would not move while those eyes were on her. Senna gripped her arm tighter. "Mabel," she whispered, in a voice Mabel had never heard her friend use before. A voice that mixed wonder with something close to fear. "That is Ronan of Ashenvale." The name landed between them like a stone dropped in still water. Mabel knew the name. Every wolf in the territory knew the name. Ronan of Ashenvale, Alpha King of the North, Lord of 3 packs, and a border no enemy had crossed in 12 years. A man who did not attend common gatherings. A man who sent representatives when he wished, and appeared in person only when the matter was serious enough to demand it. She did not understand what he was looking at. Then he took a step toward her, and the hall grew just a little quieter. Mabel did not step back. She was not sure if it was courage or simply the fact that her body had forgotten how to move. Either way, she stood where she was as Ronan of Ashenvale crossed the distance between them, with the unhurried certainty of a man who had never once needed to rush toward anything. The red-haired one came with him. So did the dark-haired one with the half-smile. But they flanked him at a distance that made it clear they were not walking with him so much as existing in the orbit of someone who moved at his own pace and expected the world to adjust accordingly. Ronan stopped 3 feet in front of her. Up close, she could see what the distance had hidden. He was not simply tall. He was built the way old castles were built, with a heaviness that suggested the structure had been made to last through things that would destroy everything around it. His jaw was sharp, his expression unreadable, and his eyes, which she could now see clearly, were a gray, so dark they were almost not gray at all. They were the color of storm clouds the moment before something broke. Those eyes were still on her. Only her. "You were leaving," he said. His voice was low, not quiet in the way of someone trying not to be heard. Quiet in the way of someone who had learned long ago that when he spoke, people leaned in. She felt the truth of that immediately, the way her own body tilted almost imperceptibly forward. She said. "Why?" It was such a direct question that for a moment she had no answer for it. Around them, the hall had reorganized itself subtly, the way water reorganizes around a stone dropped into it. People were watching. Not obviously, but watching. "I had no reason to stay," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile. Something quieter than a smile, and somehow more significant. "You do now," he said. The red-haired man appeared at Ronan's shoulder, with the energy of someone who had been waiting for an opening. He was younger than Ronan, or at least wore his age differently, with an easiness that suggested life had not yet pressed down hard enough to leave permanent marks. "She doesn't know who you are," he said to Ronan, with undisguised delight. "Look at her. She actually doesn't know if she should run or stay." "Cale," Ronan said, "I'm just observing." "Observe quietly." Cale grinned and said nothing further, though the grin itself said quite a lot. The dark-haired one stepped forward with considerably more grace, inclining his head toward Mabel in something that resembled a formal greeting, without being quite stiff enough to be one. "Forgive my companions," he said. "One of them has no manners, and the other one saves his, for occasions he considers worthy. I'm Emmerich. I try to exist somewhere between the two." "Mabel," she said, because it seemed like the only reasonable response. Mabel," Emmerich repeated, as though he were testing how the name sat in the air. "Just Mabel? Just Mabel." He glanced sideways at Ronan with an expression that lasted less than a second. She caught it anyway. Something passed between them that she could not read, some kind of private notation that meant nothing to her, and apparently meant something to both of them. Ronan had not stopped looking at her. "Walk with me," he said. It was not a question. It was also, she noticed, not quite a command. It sat somewhere in between, in that specific register that powerful people used when they wanted something, but were also, for reasons of their own, leaving a door open. Mabel thought about Dorian across the hall, standing beside Isolde Calder with his mother's satisfied expression behind him. She thought about the blue dress Senna had sewn for 3 weeks. She thought about the walk she had been making toward the door, with her head up and her hands steady. "For a short while," she said. Cale made a sound behind her that might have been a laugh quickly converted into a cough. Ronan said nothing. He simply turned, and because the door he moved toward was the one leading to the side corridor and the stone terrace beyond the hall, she followed. The terrace overlooked the eastern edge of the Vithara grounds, where the torchlight from the hall gave way to a darkness that smelled of pine and wet stone. The gathering noise was muffled here, reduced to a low hum behind thick walls. The night was cold in the specific way that Highland nights were cold, clean and sharp, with a wind that came down from somewhere higher and carried the scent of forests that had never been cleared. Ronan stood at the stone railing and looked out at the tree line. Mabel stood beside him, not too close, and waited. She had learned to wait. In the laundry house, you waited for water to heat and fabric to dry, and customers to decide if the work was good enough. Waiting did not bother her. She was comfortable in silence in a way that most people were not. Apparently so was he. They stood there long enough that the wind shifted twice before he spoke. "How long were you with Vielle?" The question surprised her, not because it was asked, but because of how precisely it was asked. Not, "Do you know Dorian Vielle?" or "What is your connection to the Crestfall pack?" He already knew. He was asking something more specific. 3 months, she said. "He made you a promise." "He did." "And broke it tonight." "He did." Ronan turned his head and looked at her. The torchlight from the nearest bracket caught the edge of his jaw and left the rest of his face in shadow. "And you walked toward the door instead of making a scene," he said. "A scene wouldn't have changed anything." "No," he agreed. "It wouldn't have." He looked back at the tree line. Mabel watched the side of his face, that unreadable stillness that seemed less like coldness and more like extreme control. Like a man who had learned to keep everything internal because the external consequences of letting things out were too significant to be careless about. "Why did you come tonight?" she asked. He glanced at her. A brief thing, sharp. "I come when there's something worth coming for." "The gathering of common packs is worth your time?" "No," he said simply. "It usually isn't." Mabel waited. He did not elaborate immediately. The wind came through again, carrying pine and cold, and somewhere far below in the forest, something moved through the undergrowth. A deer or a small wolf running a night patrol. "I had a report," he said at last, "from my border scouts, 3 weeks ago, about a woman in Vithara whose scent was flagged during a routine passage through the valley road." Mabel went very still. "Flagged," she repeated. "Scouts are trained to register unusual scents. Pack markers, bloodline signatures, traces that don't align with known lineages." He paused. "Yours doesn't align with any current record." "I'm nobody," she said. "My father was a border guard. My mother washed clothes." "Your father may have been a border guard," Ronan said, with the precision of someone choosing words carefully. "But that is not the entirety of what you are." The hall noise drifted faintly through the stone walls. Somewhere inside, Dorian Vielle was standing beside Isolde Calder, beginning the rest of his planned life. Out here on the cold terrace, the Alpha King of the North was telling Mabel that her scent had flagged a report 3 weeks ago, and that he had come personally to see why. She didn't know what to do with that, so she asked the only question that felt honest. "What do you think I am?" Ronan looked at her again. This time the look lasted longer. It moved across her face with the patience of someone reading something written in a language they know well, but have not seen written down in a long time. "I don't think," he said. "I came to confirm." Before she could answer, the terrace door opened behind them, and Cale leaned through with the expression of someone who had been waiting a reasonable amount of time and decided that reasonable had run out. "The Crestfall Beta is asking where you are," he said to Ronan. Then he looked at Mabel with something more thoughtful than his earlier humor. "And Vielle is watching the terrace door. Has been for the last 10 minutes. Mabel turned slightly toward the door. Through the narrow gap, she could see a slice of the hall's interior. And yes, Dorian was visible at the far edge of it, his eyes on exactly where she was standing. She turned back to the railing. "Let him watch," she said quietly. Cale blinked. Then he looked at Ronan with an expression that was harder to read than his usual amusement, something that sat closer to respect. Ronan said nothing. But she felt the quality of his attention shift the way a room shifts when someone opens a window. Something that had been, still became slightly, deliberately less so. "I'll come inside in a moment," Ronan told Cale. Cale nodded and let the door close. The wind moved through the terrace again. "You should go," Mabel said. "You have people waiting." "I do." He agreed and did not move. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Tomorrow," he said. "I want to speak with you again, properly. I work at the laundry house on the Valley Road. I'm there from dawn." "I know where it is." Of course he did. He had sent scouts through the Valley Road 3 weeks ago. Mabel nodded once. Ronan held her gaze for a moment longer, something passing through those storm-gray eyes that she could not name. And then he turned and went back through the door into the noise and light of the hall. She stayed on the terrace alone for a while. The wind smelled of pine and old forests and something she couldn't quite place. Something that had been there all evening, underneath everything else, patient and constant. She pressed one hand to the cold stone railing and looked out at the dark tree line. Behind her, through the walls, she could hear the gathering continuing without her. And she realized, standing in the cold with her blue dress and her mother's brooch, that she no longer felt the weight of the hall inside. The humiliation had not disappeared, but something had settled over it, the way the first frost settles over mud, making it firm enough to walk on. She stayed until she was ready. Then she went back inside with her head up, the same as she had planned. Dawn came to the Valley Road the way it always did. Slowly and without apology, gray light pressing through the gaps between the pines until the mist lifted enough to see the stones beneath your feet. Mabel was already at the laundry house when it arrived. She had not slept well. Not badly either, not in the way of someone tormented, but in the fragmented way of someone whose mind kept returning to a specific point, the way a tongue returns to a sore tooth, not out of pain exactly, but out of the need to confirm it is still there. She had lain in the dark, listening to Senna's steady breathing, and replayed the terrace 3 times before she decided that replaying it a 4th would not produce any new information, and she might as well get up. Senna had said very little when they returned from the gathering the night before. She had helped Mabel out of the blue dress, hung it carefully on the hook behind the door, and then sat on the edge of her own bed, with her hands in her lap, and looked at Mabel with that expression again, the one that knew more than it said. "Are you going to tell me what happened on the terrace?" she finally said. Not quite a question. "He talked to me. Ronan of Ashen Vale talked to you." "Yes." "For how long?" "A while." Senna was quiet for a moment. "What does he want?" "I'm not sure yet." "Mabel." "I genuinely don't know, Senna. He said his scouts flagged my scent 3 weeks ago. He said it doesn't match any known lineage record. He wants to speak with me again tomorrow." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the ones before. This one had weight. "Your scent," Senna said slowly. "That's what he said." Senna looked at her hands. Then she looked up. "Your mother never told you anything? About her side of the family?" "You know she didn't. She never talked about where she came from. Only that she left when she was young and didn't go back." "I know." "Don't you think that's worth thinking about?" Mabel had thought about it. She had thought about it in the 3 hours between lying down and giving up on sleep. She had thought about her mother's hands, always rough and red from the work, and the way she never spoke of grandparents or cousins or a home pack. The way she had raised Mabel to keep her head down and work honestly and not ask for things that weren't offered. But she had also kept that brooch. A silver wolf with blue stone eyes, too fine to belong to a laundrywoman, too specific to be random. Mabel had pinned it to her chest every time something important happened. without ever asking herself why a woman with nothing owned something that looked like it came from a noble house. She was thinking about that now, at dawn, with her hands in warm water and a pile of linen on the table, when she heard boots on the stone path outside. He came alone. She had half expected Cale and Emmerich, the red-haired one with his entertained expression and the dark-haired one with his practiced charm would have made it easier somehow, would have diffused whatever this was into something more manageable. But the door opened, and it was only Ronan, in a simpler cloak than the night before, dark wool without the formal drape, and he looked like a man who had also not slept particularly well, and had decided that was irrelevant. He stopped in the doorway. The laundry house was small and warm, and smelled of lye and heated water and the lavender Mabel added to the rinse, because one of her regular customers requested it, and then it became a habit. It was not a place built for alpha kings. The ceiling was low, and the light came from 2 small windows, and a fire that heated the water basin, and there was a line of damp fabric hanging along the far wall. Ronan looked around once. Then he looked at her. "You're already working," he said. "I start at dawn." "I said I'd come at dawn. And here you are," she said. "I wasn't going to stop working because of it." Something in his face shifted. Not quite amusement. Something in the neighborhood of it. He came inside. There was nowhere particularly dignified to stand in a laundry house, so he stood near the window, which at least gave him something to look at that wasn't the hanging linen, and he watched her work for a moment without speaking. She let him. "I brought someone," he said finally. "You said you came alone." "He's outside." Mabel dried her hands on the cloth tucked at her waist and looked at the door. Through the small window she could see a figure on the path. An older man, slightly bent at the shoulder, with white hair and the deliberate stillness of someone who spent a great deal of time being very quiet and attentive. "Who is he?" "His name is Aldrich. He is the oldest record keeper in Ashen Vale. He has catalogued bloodline signatures for 40 years. Ronan paused. "I described your scent to him last night after the gathering. He asked to come." Mabel looked at the old man through the window. He was not looking at the laundry house. He was looking at the tree line, patient, as though he had been waiting for something for a very long time and had made his peace with the waiting. "What did he say when you described it?" she asked. Ronan was quiet for a moment that told her the answer was significant. "He said it wasn't possible," Ronan said. And then he said he needed to confirm it himself. Mabel untied the cloth from her waist and set it on the table. She went to the door and opened it. The old man turned. His eyes were pale, nearly colorless, and when they found her face, they did something she had never seen eyes do before. They went very still, the way water goes still just before it reflects something clearly. He stepped forward and stopped 2 feet from her. He did not speak. He simply stood and breathed, slowly and deliberately, the way someone reads a document they need to be certain they are reading correctly. Then he closed his eyes. Then he opened them. "Child," he said, with a voice like old paper. "What was your mother's name?" "Edith," Mabel said. "Edith, no surname." That was not the name she was born with. The morning birds were loud in the pines. Somewhere down the valley road a cart was moving, wheels on stone, ordinary and distant. "What name was she born with?" Mabel asked. Aldrich looked at Ronan. Ronan gave the smallest nod she had ever seen a person give. "Edith of Varenfall," the old man said, "3rd daughter of the Varenfall line, a bloodline that was believed to have ended when the Varenfall pack was absorbed into the South Territories 30 years ago." He paused. Apparently it did not end. The cart on the valley road continued its ordinary progress. The birds continued their morning argument in the pines. Mabel stood in the doorway of the laundry house where she had worked since she was 16 years old and absorbed the information that her mother had been someone else entirely before she became the woman with rough red hands who never spoke of home. "What is the Varenfall line?" she said. Her voice was even. She was proud of that. "Old," Aldrich said simply. "Older than most current noble houses. A founding bloodline of the Northern Territories. Before the current pack structures were established, the Varenfall wolves were among those who set the original boundaries. They carried a scent signature unlike any other, unmistakable to those trained to recognize it." He looked at her with those pale, still eyes. "You carry it completely, not a trace. Not a partial inheritance. Completely." Mabel looked at Ronan. He was watching her with that same quality of attention she had noticed on the terrace. The look of someone who had suspected something, and was now watching it be confirmed, and who understood the weight of the confirmation better than the person receiving it. "This changes things," she said. "Yes," he said. "For whom?" "For everyone who was in that hall last night," he said. "And for you, most of all." She thought of Dorian, of his mother's satisfied expression, of Isolde Calder in her burgundy dress, of the promise made on a rainy afternoon and broken in a crowded hall. She thought of the walk toward the door with her head up, and the terrace, and the cold stone railing under her hand. She thought of her mother, who had left a name behind and raised a daughter to keep her head down, who had perhaps known exactly what she carried and chosen, deliberately, to let it sleep. "My mother left that life," Mabel said. "She chose to leave it." "She did," Aldrich confirmed gently. "Why?" The old man glanced at Ronan again. "That," Ronan said quietly, "is something I may be able to answer. But not here." Mabel looked at the laundry house behind her. The warm water in the basin, the linen on the line, the lavender in the rinse water, the life she had built inside the borders her mother had drawn around them both. She thought of the brooch. The silver wolf with the blue stone eyes. Not random. Never random. A message, maybe. Left by a woman who knew her daughter would one day need something to hold on to when the truth finally arrived. "How far is Ashenvale?" Mabel asked. Ronan studied her face. "Half a day's ride north," he said. "And what exactly are you asking me to do?" "Come and hear what I know," he said. "After that, every decision is yours." It was, she thought, a careful answer, possibly a practiced one. But it was also, she noticed, an answer that gave her the choice. Explicitly and without condition. She was 23 years old. She had worked in a laundry house since she was 16. She had a blue dress hanging on a hook and a silver brooch, and a dead mother whose real name had just arrived like a stone through still water. "I need an hour," she said, "to arrange the work and speak with Senna." "We'll wait," Ronan said. And she believed him. Senna did not take it well. Not in the way of someone who screamed or wept or threw things. Senna took it badly in the specific way that was entirely her own, which meant she went very quiet and very still and began folding the same piece of fabric 3 times without looking at it. "You're going to Ashenvale," she said. "To hear what he knows, that's all." "With Ronan of Ashenvale." "Yes. Who appeared out of nowhere last night and is now standing on the valley road outside our laundry house." "He's not out of nowhere. He sent scouts 3 weeks ago. He came to the gathering because of the report." "Because of your scent?" "Because of my bloodline, apparently." Senna set the fabric down. She looked at Mabel with those eyes that had always seen more than they were supposed to. "Your mother," she said slowly. "All those years. She never said a word. No. She had a brooch worth more than this building." "I know. And she named you Mabel. Just Mabel. Nothing attached." "I know, Senna." Her friend was quiet for a long moment. Then she crossed the small room and stood in front of Mabel and took both her hands the way she had done since they were children, when one of them was frightened and needed something solid to hold on to. "I'm coming with you," Senna said. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I'm coming." Mabel looked at her. This woman who had sewn a blue dress for 3 weeks and pricked her fingers without complaint. Who had stood beside her in the hall last night and said nothing after the promise was broken because she knew that Mabel needed silence more than she needed words. Who had slept in the same room for 7 years and known her through all of it. "All right," Mabel said. "Come." They rode north. Ronan had brought horses, which she had not thought to wonder about, but which in retrospect made complete sense. He was a man who thought ahead and arranged things without announcing that he was arranging them. Mabel rode beside him at the front. Senna rode behind with Emmerich, who proved to be the kind of person who could generate a steady, comfortable conversation out of almost nothing, which Mabel suspected was not accidental. Cale rode on Ronan's other side and spent the first hour of the journey in a state of theatrical patience that eventually broke. "So," he said, to no one in particular. "Varenfall." "Cale," Ronan said. "I'm just saying the word. I'm allowed to say the word. You're allowed to say it quietly." "Varenfall," Cale said again at exactly the same volume. Then he looked at Mabel with something more honest than his usual performance. "Do you understand what that means, in terms of the Northern Territories?" "I'm still working through it," she said. "It means that half the pack leaders who were in that hall last night just lost a significant political argument they didn't know they were having." He paused. "It also means that a certain beta chief's son from Crestfall is going to spend the next several years understanding what he walked away from." "Cale," Ronan said again, with a weight that closed the subject. Cale subsided. But Mabel had heard it. And she filed it away beside everything else she was filing. The old man's pale, still eyes. The name Varenfall settling over her like a cloak she had not known she was supposed to be wearing. The forest thickened as they moved north. The pines grew taller, and the road narrowed, and the light came through in long diagonal columns that made the air look solid. It smelled different up here. Deeper. Older. Like the trees had been standing since before anyone had thought to name them. She rode beside Ronan, and they did not speak for long stretches. And she noticed that the silence between them had the same quality it had on the terrace. Not empty. Not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that exists between people who are both accustomed to it and find, with some surprise, that the other person does not need to fill it. How long have you known about the Varenfall line?" she asked, when the road widened again. "I knew it existed," he said. "Every serious record keeper in the North knows it existed. The question was always whether anyone carrying it survived the absorption. And you thought someone might have?" "I didn't think anything specific." Aldrich had always maintained that a complete disappearance of a bloodline that strong was unlikely. Bloodlines don't simply stop. They go quiet. They hide. He looked at the road ahead. Your mother understood that. She hid it well. She hid herself, Mabel said. I'm not sure she thought about me. She kept the brooch, Ronan said quietly. Mabel looked at him. A woman who wanted to disappear completely would have left it behind, he said. She kept it, and she passed it to you. That was an accident. Mabel thought about her mother's hands again. The roughness of them. The permanent redness. The way they moved through work with a quiet efficiency that never looked like defeat, even when it probably was. A woman who had chosen a small life. Who had built walls around herself and her daughter and never explained why. Who had left one silver wolf with blue stone eyes, as though she knew that one day the walls would come down and her daughter would need something to recognize herself by. Ashenvale came into view in the early afternoon. Mabel had expected a castle. What she had not expected was the scale of it. It sat on elevated ground, where the forest broke into a wide, natural clearing. Stone walls so old they had taken on the color of the surrounding rock. Towers that rose above the tree line with a simplicity that somehow made them more imposing than ornamentation would have. The gates were open. Inside she could see the movement of a functioning keep, guards on the walls, people crossing the yard, the organized activity of a large and well-run place. The pack that came out to meet them in the yard was not ceremonial. These were working wolves, some in armor, some not, who acknowledged Ronan's arrival with the ease of people accustomed to his presence, and then looked at Mabel with the more focused attention of people encountering something new. She felt the weight of those looks and kept her posture straight. A woman came forward from the group near the main entrance. She was perhaps 50, with iron-gray hair pulled back severely and eyes that moved over Mabel with the rapid precision of someone running a rapid assessment and reaching conclusions faster than most people formed questions. "This is Hesta," Ronan said. "She runs the keep." "She runs considerably more than the keep," Hesta said, without particular modesty. She looked at Mabel steadily. "Aldrich sent word ahead. I've had the eastern rooms prepared." "Thank you," Mabel said. Hesta studied her for another moment. "You have her jaw," she said. "Your mother. I only saw Edith of Varenfall once when I was a girl. But you have her jaw." The yard was busy and loud, and smelled of horses and wood smoke. Mabel stood in the middle of it, and absorbed the fact that this woman had seen her mother as a young woman, that her mother had existed in places like this before she became someone else, that the life her mother had left behind had continued without her, and still held the shape of her absence. "You knew her," Mabel said. "I knew of her," Hesta corrected gently. "She left before I was old enough to know her properly, but she was spoken of." A brief pause. "She was always spoken of." Ronan showed her the records himself that evening, in the room that served as his archive. It was a long room with shelves from floor to ceiling, and a table wide enough to spread maps across, lit by a chandelier of iron and candles, and smelling of old paper and tallow, and the particular dry cold that old documents seemed to generate on their own. He pulled 3 ledgers and set them on the table, and stood beside her while she read. The Varenfall line was older than she had grasped from Aldrich's description. It went back further than most current pack noble houses, to the original territorial arrangements of the North, to agreements made in a language that the current records only partially preserved. The founding wolves, the ones who had set the first boundaries. And 30 years ago, when the southern expansion had absorbed the Varenfall pack territory, most of the line had been folded into other houses by arrangement or necessity, except for the 3rd daughter of the last Varenfall chief, who had simply not been accounted for. Edith, who had walked away, who had taken nothing but a silver brooch and a name she stopped using. Mabel turned a page and found a passage that Aldrich had marked with a strip of leather. It described, in the careful neutral language of record-keeping, the specific qualities associated with the Varenfall bloodline, the scent signature, the unusual strength of the pack bond when a Varenfall wolf claimed one, the rarity of the line, and what it historically meant for any pack fortunate enough to carry it. She read it twice. Then she looked up at Ronan, who was watching her with the patience of someone who had waited through the reading and was now waiting through the processing. "This is why they would have wanted to absorb the pack," she said. "Not just the territory, the bloodline itself." "Yes," he said, "and my mother knew that." "Almost certainly. So she left before they could use her for it." Ronan was quiet for a moment. "That is my reading of it," he said. "She chose a life where no one could claim her bloodline for political purpose." A pause. It was not a small sacrifice. Mabel looked back at the page, at the careful script that described, in the dispassionate language of records, what her mother had been and chosen not to be. She thought of the rough red hands, the lavender in the rinse water, the small window in the laundry house that looked out on the valley road. A life built inside walls her mother had drawn deliberately to protect something she understood was valuable enough to hide. And at the center of it, a daughter she had raised to keep her head down, who had nonetheless, on the night everything fell apart, walked toward the door with her chin up. Mabel closed the ledger. "What do you want from me?" she said, directly, because she was done circling it. Ronan did not look away. "Nothing you don't choose to give," he said. "But I want you to understand what you are before you decide anything. You've been making decisions without the full information. That ends tonight." "And after tonight?" "After tonight," he said, "you decide where you go, what you do with what you know, whether you stay or leave." He held her gaze. "I will not arrange your life for you, but I will not pretend I don't have a position on the matter." "What is your position?" He was quiet for a moment that felt very deliberate. "I think you belong here," he said. "Not because of the bloodline, not because of what it means for the pack or the territory or any record in this room." A pause. "Because of how you walked toward that door last night. Because of what you said on the terrace. Because of what you didn't say, which told me considerably more." The candles burned. The old paper held its dry, cold smell around them. Mabel stood beside the wide table with her mother's ledger closed under her hands and looked at the man who had crossed a hall full of pack nobles to walk toward a woman in a blue dress who was trying to leave with her dignity intact. She did not answer immediately, but she did not look away. She stayed. Not because he asked her to. Not because the ledgers demanded it, or the bloodline required it, or because Ashenvale was larger and warmer than the room she shared with Senna on the Valley Road. She stayed because when she stood in that archive with the old records closed under her hands and looked at Ronan of Ashenvale, she understood for the first time in her life that she was not making a decision based on what was available to her. She was making a decision based on what she wanted. That was new. It took 3 weeks to arrange the practical things. Senna was not going back to the laundry house, which she announced on the second morning at Ashenvale, with the calm certainty of someone who had already decided and was simply informing the relevant parties. Hesta, who had assessed Senna in approximately 4 minutes and concluded she was useful, put her to work in the keep's household management with a directness that Senna found deeply satisfying. They understood each other immediately, those two, in the way that competent practical women sometimes do, without ceremony or excessive warmth, simply with the recognition that the other person would not waste their time. The laundry house on the Valley Road was passed to a woman named Petra, who had been working there part-time for 2 years and knew the customers and the rhythms and the particular lavender ratio in the rinse water. Mabel went back once to arrange it properly. She stood in the small warm room that smelled of lye and heated water and looked at the line of damp fabric and the 2 small windows and the fire under the basin. She did not feel nothing. She had expected to feel nothing, and was honest enough with herself to acknowledge that she felt quite a lot. The specific grief of leaving something that had held you, even when it was not what you deserved. The way a too small coat still leaves a cold when you take it off. She took the blue dress. She left the metal mirror. She rode back to Ashenvale in the afternoon light with the dress folded across the saddlebag and the silver brooch pinned at her chest. And when the keep came into view above the tree line, she realized she was not bracing herself the way she usually braced for arrival somewhere. She was simply arriving. The political consequences of what Aldrich had confirmed moved faster than she had expected. She had imagined it would be a quiet thing, the kind of information that spread slowly through careful channels over months. She had underestimated how many people paid close attention to what Ronan of Ashenvale did and where he directed his interest. Within 2 weeks of her arrival, 3 pack leaders had sent formal inquiries to Ashenvale. Within 3 weeks, Aldrich's confirmation had circulated among the senior record keepers of the Northern Territories, and the name Varenfall had been quietly reinserted into the active bloodline registry for the first time in 30 years. Hesta explained the implications over breakfast one morning, with the same tone she used to discuss supply inventories. "You are no longer invisible," she said. "Adjust accordingly." "What does that mean practically?" Mabel asked. "It means people will look at you differently. Some with interest, some with calculation, some with resentment." Hesta poured herself more tea. You already know how to handle all three. You've been doing it your whole life. You simply didn't know why they were looking. Mabel thought about that for several days. It was Cale, unexpectedly, who said the most useful thing. He found her one afternoon in the yard where she had taken to walking in the late hour before dinner, when the light went amber through the trees and the keep settled into its evening rhythms. He fell into step beside her with his hands behind his back, which was unusual enough that she looked at him. "Can I say something without it being a thing?" he said. "Probably not, but go ahead." He almost smiled. He hasn't looked at anyone like that in a long time. A pause. Since before his father died and the full weight of the 3 packs came down on him. Since before the border wars. Since before he became the version of himself that runs everything and delegates the feeling of things to people like me and Emmerich. Mabel kept walking. "I'm not telling you what to do with that," Cale continued. "I'm just telling you it's real, because I know how it can look from the outside. The Alpha King takes an interest in a discovered bloodline. Very convenient. Very political." He glanced at her. "It's not that. I've watched it be other things, and I know the difference." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're the kind of person who will talk yourself out of things you want by convincing yourself the wanting is naive," he said. "I recognize it because Emmerich does it too, just more elegantly." He left her to her walk without waiting for a response, which she appreciated more than any answer she could have given would have conveyed. It was Ronan himself who told her about her mother, not from the records, from memory. They were in the archive again, a month after her arrival, on an evening when the wind had come down hard from the north, and the candles guttered in drafts that found their way through the old stone walls. He had been showing her more of the Varenfall documents, filling in pieces she hadn't had context for, and at some point, the formal quality of the session had dissolved, and they were simply talking, the way they had talked on the terrace, with the ease of people who had found the particular frequency on which the other person's silence made sense. He told her that his father had known Edith of Varenfall. Not well, but he had met her twice, in the years before she disappeared, at territorial gatherings. He had written about her in his own private records, which Ronan had inherited, and read years later without fully understanding the significance. She had been, his father wrote, the most self-possessed person in any room she entered, not through arrogance but through a specific quality of stillness, the kind that made you feel, in her presence, that everything was slightly more manageable than it had seemed a moment before. Ronan read her the passage from his father's record, in the low candlelight with the wind outside, and Mabel listened to a dead man's description of her dead mother, and felt something she did not have a precise word for, a grief and a recognition wound together so tightly she could not have separated them if she tried. "She sounds like you," Ronan said, when he finished reading. "I thought I was nothing like her." "You are entirely like her," he said, "in the way that matters." She looked at him across the table. "She left because she didn't want to be used," Mabel said. "Yes. I need you to understand that I will do the same," she said. "If this becomes about the bloodline and the registry and the political weight of the Varenfall name, I will leave. I am telling you directly so that there is no ambiguity later." Ronan held her gaze. "I know," he said. "I'm telling you directly in return that that is not what this is, and that if I ever give you reason to doubt that, I expect you to tell me before you go." "I will." "Good." The candles burned. The wind pressed against the old walls and found no way through. "My father was wrong about one thing," Ronan said after a moment. "What?" "He wrote that she was the most self-possessed person in any room she entered." He paused. He hadn't met her daughter. Mabel looked at him for a long moment. Then, for the first time since the night of the blue dress and the broken promise and the terrace and all of it, she smiled. Not the careful, managed expression she had been using since she arrived, the one that kept things at a workable distance. A real one. Ronan looked at her like a man seeing something he had been waiting to see confirmed. The formal recognition came 6 weeks after her arrival. It was not a large ceremony. Ronan was not a man who valued spectacle for its own sake, and Mabel had no interest in it either, which was one of the many things they had established they agreed on. It was witnessed by the senior wolves of Ashenvale, by Aldrich with his pale, still eyes, by Hesta with her iron-gray practicality, by Cale who managed to be moved and irreverent simultaneously, and by Emmerich who was simply, quietly glad, and by Senna, who stood at Mabel's side and held her hand through the formal words, the way she had held it through every important thing, and who said nothing afterward except to grip tighter for a moment and then let go. Because that was enough, and they both knew it. The bond between Mabel and Ronan was declared before the pack, not a political arrangement, not a bloodline merger, a chosen bond, spoken plainly and witnessed cleanly. He said, "I see you. I choose you. Not what you carry, but who you are." She said, "I see you. I choose you," with full knowledge and no condition. It was, Cale said afterward, the least dramatic formal bonding he had ever witnessed, and therefore, somehow, the most convincing. 3 months after the gathering at Vithara, a rider came from the Crestfall pack with a message addressed to Mabel. It was from Dorian. She read it once. He wrote that he had heard what had been confirmed about her bloodline. He wrote that he wanted her to know he regretted what had happened at the gathering. He wrote several other things in careful language that added up, when read plainly, to the information that Isolde Calder had ended the arrangement after 2 months, and that he was writing now because he felt she deserved an explanation. She read it once, and then she set it on the table, and looked out the window of her room at the Ashenvale yard, where 2 of the younger pack wolves were running a training circuit in the cold morning air, and where Ronan was standing near the gate speaking with his border captains, and where Senna was crossing from the east wing to the kitchens with a ledger under her arm and the expression of someone who had a list and intended to work through it. She did not write back. Not out of cruelty. There was no cruelty in it. There was simply nothing to say that the silence did not say better. Dorian Vale would live his life in Crestfall, managing his mother's expectations and his pack's politics, and the ordinary weight of the choices he had made and not made. He would be fine. People like Dorian were always fine. He had simply been the wrong eyes for what he was looking at. She folded the letter and put it in the fire and watched it go. In the spring, Hesta pulled her aside one morning with the expression she wore when she had practical information to convey. "You should know," she said, in her direct way, "that the Varenfall name in the registry has already shifted 3 territorial conversations that had been stuck for years. Pack leaders who were dug into positions have found reasons to become more flexible." A pause. "Your existence is doing political work you haven't been asked to do." "I know," Mabel said. Ronan explained it. "Good. I'm telling you so you understand it's real and ongoing and will not diminish. You will be looked at for the rest of your life." Hesta studied her. "Can you live with that?" Mabel thought of her mother, the walls, the small life chosen deliberately, the long protection that had also been a kind of imprisonment. She thought of herself, 23 years old, walking toward a door with her head up because she had nothing left to lose, and she was not going to lose that too. "I'm not my mother," she said. "I love what she did. I understand why she did it, but I am not going to hide." Hesta looked at her for a moment. "No," she said. "I didn't think you were." By summer, Ashenvale had settled into a shape that felt, for the first time in Mabel's life, like something she had not simply arrived at but chosen. The pack accepted her with the practical directness that seemed to characterize everything in this place, not effusively, not without the occasional friction of adjustment, but genuinely. She learned their rhythms, and they learned hers. Senna thrived in a way that living above a laundry house had never allowed, with the particular brightness of someone who has finally been given enough room. Cale remained exactly himself, which was a relief. Emmerich remained courteous, and quietly observant, and occasionally said something so precisely true that it took her a moment to catch it. Aldrich visited twice more with additional documents, and each time sat with Mabel for hours going through the Varenfall records with the focused joy of a man doing the work he was made for. And Ronan. Ronan was the same as he had been on the terrace that first night, and in the archive, and on the road north, and in every conversation that had accumulated between then and now. A man of few words and significant attention. A man who noticed things and acted on what he noticed, without requiring the actions to be recognized. A man who, she had come to understand, had carried the weight of 3 packs and a northern border for long enough that he had forgotten what it felt like to set something down. She could not take the weight from him. She did not try. But she stood beside it with him, which was, she thought, what he had actually needed and perhaps never expected to find. On a warm evening in late summer, sitting on the same type of stone railing she had stood at the night, everything changed, watching the tree line go dark in the last of the light. He sat beside her and was quiet for a while, and then said, "Are you glad you stayed?" She looked at the forest, at the old trees that had been standing since before anyone named them, at the Ashenvale walls behind her, warm with light from the windows, alive with the sounds of a pack that was hers now. She thought of the blue dress and the broken promise, and the walk toward the door. She thought of her mother's rough red hands and the silver brooch and a name left behind like a coat outgrown. She thought of an old man's pale, still eyes saying it was not possible, and then saying, "But here you are." Here she was. "Yes," she said. Ronan looked at her the way he had looked at her across the hall that first night, as though he had been searching for something specific and found it in a place he had not expected. He took her hand. She let him. The forest went dark. The keep glowed behind them, and the night settled over Ashenvale, the way nights settle over places that have found their shape, quietly, completely, with nothing left unresolved. Mabel of Varenfall was home.